Elevation Nation. One of the most beautiful things about having a company, having a podcast, having a community of elevators is when we get introduced to someone else who's conquering the real world in their 20s and 30s, kicking ass, and really elevating their mental fortitude. And our guest tonight epitomizes that. We got to give a quick shout out to the Kalamazoo boys, right?
Yes.
We got Jamari Bogan, Zach Novoselsky. If you haven't seen their episodes of the podcast, go look back, check them out. They are two incredible men conquering the real world. But we have on one of their friends coming live from Kalamazoo today. Kyle, Gulau, welcome to Elevation Nation, brother. We are so excited to have you on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You know, I will say Kalamazoo has come up a lot in my life this year. I don't think I've ever heard of Kalamazoo before I met Zach Novoselsky. And then Zach introduced us to Jamari. And then Sam said that, Jamari was going to introduce us to Kyle, all from Kalamazoo. And then I'm watching this this documentary on TV by, this little guy named Derek Jeter.
Yeah, that's right.
He's also from Kalamazoo. I'm like, why? This is crazy. There's so many freaking... You know what's common among those four people? They're all elevators. Derek Jeter's an elevator. And maybe elevation is like there's something about Kalamazoo water or something. I don't know. Just saying.
Yeah. Kalamazoo's a really cool town. We've got a lot of good history and, a lot of good people here.
And one thing about Kalamazoo that I've noticed in talking with, you for a bit, Kyle, but Zach and Jamari, is it seems to be ripe, to Parker's point, with people trying to do something to impact the community.
Yeah.
And that I think is really unique, right? I've moved around a lot in my adult life, haven't necessarily found like a local community where I'm like, I'm in DC now, I was in New York before. It's not like I'm going around DC and feel like empowered to build it up. But I feel like there's this sense of camaraderie with Kalamazoo of the folks that are still there that are like, this is our town and we're going to make it better. And I know you and Jamari are doing similar-ish things when it comes to real estate and working in the community with some of your philanthropy and just endeavors. What about Kalamazoo kind of has drawn you to want to give back to that community?
Well, I think the locals here, I guess I am one of them. The term is Kalamazoo, because once you come here, you just stick for some reason. But I do think, so there's that lovely anecdote. I do think that in Kalamazoo, I've always felt that here I had a place, it just felt like there was more opportunity. It felt like in a big city, it'd be easy to get lost. It felt like in a bigger city, maybe my story wouldn't be as elevated, or I wouldn't be able to elevate as quickly. And it's been an interesting ride. Obviously, I only have a sample size of one city that I've really tried to do this in since I've started my professional career. So I recognize I have a small sample size, but I think I've had a lot of luck, and I think there's a lot of other guys that have too. And I think the leadership here in town, I'm going to turn into a Kalamazoo commercial real quick. If you haven't heard of the Kalamazoo Promise, it's one of the, I think, anonymous donors have created this fund for anyone who goes K through 12 at KPS can get free college tuition in the state of Michigan. So there is this belief that we've reached a critical mass of these awesome people here, and there's even a gift for people who are raising their families here to help their kids have an awesome future and have access to free education, which is really cool. So if you're thinking about starting a family and you're worried about the college bill, come to Kalamazoo. Here ends the commercial.
Any
awesome
school
town.
In Michigan?
Any school, any
public.
So you go K through 12 in KPS, and you would be able to go. You have to get accepted into the university, whichever one you choose. But if you get in, you get free tuition. That program, Kalamazoo Promise, covers it all. Yeah,
it's pretty incredible.
I've never heard of that. I've never heard of a city ever doing that. That's pretty incredible.
It's pretty incredible. The second thing I will say about our city, which is even maybe on top, well, it depends. I guess your political stance here. There's an article recently in Time Magazine about this. Kalamazoo is also the only city that I'm aware of to effectively have it's called the Foundation of Excellence. So we have the Kalamazoo Promise, free college tuition for K through 12 KPS grads. And then we also have the Foundation of Excellence, which is essentially this fund that has been put aside by another group of I don't know if it's a group of anonymous donors. I guess I should be careful about how I'm talking about this, but there's a fund set aside of private dollars that help subsidize and stabilize the city budget, and the dividends from that fund are also kicked off to then do bigger projects, growth initiatives in the city, which is absolutely incredible. And I don't think any city has that either. So when we really think about this combination of opportunity and growth for future generations, Kalamazoo, from my perspective, is really trying to position itself as a leader in the country. And I think it's really something that's not spoken of very much, or doesn't really make the mainstream.
It's, inspiring to hear about local government trying to make an impact for their people and genuinely trying to make an impact for their people, because I do think that trickles down to its residents as well, right? Looking at Jamari and looking at yourself, Kyle, of what you guys are doing, and right, being Kalamazoo guys, sticking around and trying to make the community a better place. So
is that the podcast episode title now?
I kind of like. I think I kind of like it. I'm not gonna lie.
We'll get all three of us on at once, and we'll talk.
I know the importance of a glue guy on any team, because you can't tell through the recording, Kyle, but I'm 5'8", maybe on a good day, and played basketball in high school where Zach went to school, and we were pretty good. And I didn't play much, but I was a glue guy, so I understand the importance of being the glue guy. So let's get into a little bit, Kyle, of what you do.
The Kalamazoo commercial.
I love it. No, thank you. We'll take sponsorship, Kalamazoo.
Yeah, there we go.
We're open to sponsorships. I have a question for you. This is Elevation Nation, the Elevation Nation podcast. So we usually start off every podcast by allowing you to give an elevator pitch. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Let's let the nation know who you are.
Yeah. Okay. My elevator pitch. I do two things that I think my career has evolved around, two things, and building things digitally and building them physically. So the way my career path, although it's non-traditional, has unfolded is building things digitally. I have my own digital consultancy where we build websites and apps for folks. That's about a team of 7. I started that about a year ago. Before I did that, I was working in some creative agencies, and I did some entrepreneur stuff. We can get into that later. But that's kind of where my digital building muscle is getting flexed at the moment. And then I also have my real estate company, which is a slightly different approach there. That's just me, my new wife of less than a month. And
congratulations!
My dad, actually. Thank you. So that's a family operation, but that's the real estate dev is trying to figure out how I can take the returns from the digital side and investing it in the physical side, diversify the portfolio. And of course, that whole journey of real estate started with just looking for a home, and there's a whole bunch of stories to unpack there as well. But that's the elevator pitch: building things digitally and building things physically. If I'm not building stuff, I find myself really trying to teach. I feel like teaching really helps sharpen the sword. So I do that in a couple of ways. I have my own podcast where I talk about architecture, urban planning, and real estate. And there I've learned a lot about, those 3 topics, I suppose. And then I also try to give back a lot of my time and serve on a couple of boards in town: Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, Economic Development Corporation, and then Community Homeworks, where I'm the president of the board. I think the first 2 are kind of self-explanatory. That's like local economic development, government stuff. And the other one, Community Homeworks, is a board where we do critical home repairs for families in need. So there's low-income families they're on the cusp of losing their house, or the quality of life just isn't what it should be. And that nonprofit provides a lot of emergency services to help make the home up to code so they don't get booted out by the city for not making code compliance. And then also, providing heat for families in the winter, providing maybe clean water, getting rid of lead paint, those types of things. So,
which as a Midwest boy is extremely important.
That's right.
Right? The Midwestern winters are legit. Oof. And damn, Kyle,
there we go.
That's impressive, man. That's
not a good elevator pitch. That turned into a bio, but
that's
It started as an elevator pitch, and then we dovetailed. Anyway,
that is truly okay. Go ahead, Parker.
Kyle, I mean, you're talking about all these different things that you're doing, and it's incredible to listen to and hear how, you have this drive, this passion to make the world a better place using your knowledge and bringing other people's knowledge together to not only make an impact in your businesses, but your community, your government, all of that. It's super incredible, especially for a young adult. We've had on some pretty cool people who have done a lot of amazing things, but what's really cool about your story is that you're doing a lot of things at the same time, it sounds like. And you're not working for someone else besides yourself when it comes to making money and I guess making money so that you can live. But then on top of that, all that added, workload that you put on yourself from the business side, you're still adding more to your plate with the 2 podcasts that you have and the volunteer work that you do and the boards that you sit on, everything.
And getting married. Let's not forget
And
that.
getting
That's a
married.
small feat.
That was a
I
fun
would
little
say.
project. That
Yeah.
in and of itself,
Yeah,
right?
just a little one. I mean, there's
Maybe
so
maybe your
much.
wife shouldn't hear that it's a project. Maybe we'll cut that
she's,
part out.
She's in the other room. It's fine.
So unpack that for us a little bit. Like, were you working at a job and you were just like, I can't work for someone else. I need to run by my own time and go by my own things. Like, walk us through that.
I think there's 3 chapters to how my career has unfolded from graduating college, graduating undergrad. The first chapter was just say yes to everything and do everything, which is crazy considering what I just said, right? What do you mean he's doing less than everything? So I graduated undergrad, Western Michigan grad here, and it was kind of doing yes to everything and also just doing a whole bunch of stuff, starting all these little businesses, getting a couple of guys over here. And we're going to try this. And I got these other guys over here and we're trying this. And I'm doing this over here. And it was super scattered, not very well thought through, but valuable experience. And one of those things that I was a part of was a startup company that I got involved with that was doing about $1 million in revenue at the time. They were working on an electronic health record system platform for behavioral health care. And I started to spend more and more of my time there. I rose my way up the ladder, started on the programming side, and that's what I went to school for, one of my degrees, and actually then moved to the finance operations side of that business. That was my other degree. And through that journey, I kind of got burned out, right? So imagine taking a company from 2 million to 10 million plus having all these other little side projects, and it was just like, okay, this is crazy. So that there ends chapter 1. And I was like, I gotta focus on something. What's that focus going to be? And it turned into being like, okay, part of getting a focus is settling down, having headquarters. Is Kalamazoo the place for that? And the easy answer was yes.
I mean, it's in the
first
damn
5
name.
minutes.
Kalamazoo, of course it's going to be.
Yeah, there we go. Come on. We already talked about that. So Kalamazoo's the home. Then the second question was, well, what am I going to focus on, or how am I going to do that? And physically, how is a home going to manifest itself? And I didn't think that I didn't see myself getting a home in Portage or one of the other suburbs around here. The detached single family home, have to drive 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes to work. That didn't really interest me. And I was fortunate enough to have a mentor at the time who said, you should think about buying some older, maybe abandoned buildings in Kalamazoo and trying to rehab those and turning them into your home, but it could also become a real estate development opportunity. Okay. So I took the wealth from chapter 1 and started thinking about chapter 2. And chapter 2 was also recognizing that the time horizon for development is so long, and I know absolutely nothing. So I was like, okay, I need to be focused and leverage the experience that I have I need to pay the bills while I'm trying to figure out this real estate thing. And that ended up me getting a more traditional W-2 job at a creative agency here in town. And I worked there as a strategist for a little while, kind of leveraging my entrepreneurial experience and taking that and applying it to other businesses. And that chapter kind of started to unfold, and then COVID hit. I think that COVID's a nice little intermission in chapter 2 where it's, okay, we got the home, we got the first building done, we got a couple of buildings elsewhere, a couple other properties. How do we then, what do we do next? Like, what's going on here? COVID hit, started working from home all the time, and it was like, okay, I feel like there's a really big opportunity to start flexing that entrepreneurial muscle again and begin focusing on doing my own digital things. And that's kind of how that transition then into chapter 3, which is the present, which is kind of doing the real estate and the digital building of things. And now the journey, chapter 4, is going to be when I found how to overlap those two circles. All right, we got the real estate on one side, we've got the digital on one side. How do I start doing digital real estate things? And of course, that can lead us into a whole variety of different topics. But that's, I think, the best way that I could describe where I started. It kind of explains the entrepreneurial background, a little bit of a settling down, but an introduction into real estate, and then really leaning into leveraging my entrepreneur and then consulting experience with this real estate, and how do I get those things to overlap is the ultimate goal, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years to really start moving towards that. So how do I instead of making a website for, a random company in Indiana, how could I make a website for a real estate company in Kalamazoo? How can I make an app that would help connect street artists to blank walls, right? I connect developers in my community to artists from Chicago, right? How to get artists from Chicago in here. Like if I start figuring out how to do those types of projects, then I can start building things digitally that impact my world physically. And that would be just the ultimate sweet spot. So we're not quite there yet, but that's the vision. That's the path that we're on.
I mean, I absolutely love where you're headed. I want to highlight a couple things that you said, Kyle, because that was a lot to unpack and such a great way to break it down. You talked about chapters, right? This concept of chapters, which I find very intriguing. And you also talked about vision. So I want to fill you in on something that all of Elevation Nation is well aware of. And we said we were indoctrinating you into your hazing process.
That's right.
To get into the nation is this podcast. So we're going to teach you our pillars of Elevation Nation. It's a concept that we call mental fortitude, right? So when Parker and I were struggling right out of college, we didn't know who we were, what we wanted, where we were going, how to get there. We literally locked ourselves in a condo for a week straight when we had off from work, and we just tried to figure out what our lives were. Like, where were we going? We did everything right. Like, we got good grades, we got internships, and we just weren't happy. And it was really scary to both of us that, like, you could follow what you thought was society's plan for you and your parents' plan for you and be miserable. And so after a lot of coffee and brainstorming and Post-it notes, we came up with this concept called mental fortitude. And what that means to us is we break it down into three main pillars: self-awareness, knowing who you are, vision, and accountability, right? And those are the three main pillars of mental fortitude, the three most important things that we think young people need to be successful and conquer the real world, right? And you talked about these different chapters, and I think, if I can guess correctly, you reflected at each one of those chapters to figure out who is this chapter version of Kyle, right? Mm-hmm. And then you took that wisdom and that self-reflection and said, okay, well, what's my vision? Where do I want to go in this chapter, right? And then lastly, you said, that's great. I know who I am and I know where I want to go, but that's only half the battle. How am I going to get there? How am I going to hold myself accountable, right? And the reason why I'm highlighting your concept of chapters and why I thought that was so beautiful that you broke down, I mean, guys, you can't see Kyle, but you can probably tell he's young. He's already had 4 chapters in his life. But I think that concept of chapters is so beautiful and something I want to reiterate, because people listen to Elevation Nation. We have people reach out to us and say, Sam, like, I reflected. I know who I am. Like, I have my vision. I knew how to hold myself accountable. But, like, now what? And we said, you got to do that all the time. You got to take a step back and figure out who's this 6-month, 1 year from now version of you. You change every single day. The people you meet, the experiences you go through, the struggles that you have. And so I think there's this misnomer with mental fortitude that it's like that's the key to life. Like, one time, brush my hands, let me self-reflect, and I'm good until I'm 90. It's like, no, you're a human. You change, you evolve. There are chapters in your life. And if you use mental fortitude regularly, by journaling, by talking to a therapist, by making a vision board, right? Like, whatever it is, you adjust with your chapters of life. And I think that's so important, and why I love that you kind of shared that with us, Kyle, of you've already had 4 chapters and you're moving on, right? That you needed mental fortitude in each one of those chapters to figure out what was next.
Yeah. Oh man, there's so much to unpack there. I love the pillars: self-awareness, vision, accountability. I think the chapters concept came to me recently when I was talking to another buddy of mine, describing how marriage is kind of a chapter where you can control that page turning, right? I mean, for those, if you don't know necessarily Ariel and I that well, but Ariel and I have known each other for 5 or 6 years, lived together for a couple. So the way that we saw our relationship, at least to us, was kind of like a foregone conclusion. Like, the marriage wasn't a big surprise, but it was a formality of like, okay, this gives us the opportunity to really turn that next page in that next chapter. And it's interesting to think about how in that concept, or through that lens, there's opportunities in life where you don't control when that chapter flips over. There's maybe an unexpected tragedy, or an unexpected positive thing that happens, or just maybe a pattern that you start to fall in, and the chapter just starts to unwind and fold into the next one. So it's interesting to really be thinking about life through that lens, because there's sometimes you can control it, sometimes you can't. But I think that self-awareness piece is so key to kind of recognize where those moments are and those kind of key yard markers. And the way I kind of described it, you can tell, is like, hey, there's graduating from college. There was this kind of a little bit of a career change, and then trying to figure out, where am I going to settle down? And I think then the third one was starting then my own digital consultancy. I think those were kind of the big milestones. And it's interesting to, as I'm describing this to you guys, I'm kind of exploring this idea more, how it's related to work. But I think there's also other personal events that can kind of flip those chapters too. So it's interesting there's different ways you can kind of filter and distill all of that.
So you got like all these things that you're flipping the chapter, the pages. If we're looking at a book and you're reading through this book, you have an idea of what's going to come, right?
That's right.
In that next chapter.
Yeah.
But we're talking about experimenting. I'm sure there's a lot that you do new and you try to do new where you don't really necessarily know the outcome.
That's right.
But it feels right. It might feel wrong, but there might be something good. How do you go about that process? Is it something that you're sitting in your bed, your room in the morning or over a cup of coffee and you're just like, you know what, I'm going to try this? Or is it, all right, I'm just going. Like, it's not really like there's not a calculated process to make a decision when it comes to your personal life with your marriage or business or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the question, is it an art or a science, right? And I think it's a little bit of both. I think journaling has really helped. I mean, Sam, you mentioned that earlier. I think that's been a really key element to being able to go through. I started journaling 10 years ago. It's incredible to have that stack of moleskins. I think, it's like this wide. And for those of you who can't see me, I think it's like 7 or 8 moleskins now. I'm almost one a year. And it's really impressive to go back and be like, what was Kyle doing in 2013?
But is it about that outcome? Is it about the idea that going back, or is it about that journaling point in the moment? Because I think a lot of people see about it, journaling as I'm journaling what my life is like, and so in a year I know what I was thinking. Or is it literally the process of in the moment, just kind of reflecting and just like
for me, I think it's a little bit of both. And I think to go back to your first question, because that doesn't really help. But when I'm thinking about the chapters in the books, it's whenever you start thinking about a decision, you're reflecting on it and saying, what should I do? It's kind of like a multiverse, right? We'll keep sticking with the book analogy for a second. Depending on the decision you make, there's all these chapters that stack up and kind of unfold out to infinitum. And I think that's kind of what's interesting is as you're maybe in the moment, you're trying to scenario plan out, if this happens, then maybe how did those things kind of unfold, right? And then I think as you're reflecting, the goal of reflection is to try to be like, this is how I thought things would unfold. This is how they actually unfolded. And what can I do to then help take that information and help make a better decision in the future?
We had on a guest a few months ago who we're going to have to introduce you to. And this is, again, another reason why we love the podcast. Chase Damiano. He is a leadership coach out here in the DC area. And we talked all about this topic of is it an art or is it a science when going outside the comfort zone and doing something new? And that's actually what we ended up focusing the episode on. And it was one that I struggled with because I actually think I disagreed a little bit with Parker on some of these thoughts and Chase too. But I'm a pretty type A guy. I like to plan out my day. I got a calendar. I'm pretty organized. And so when it comes to big decisions, I'm not as good at just going ahead and doing them. And we talked about the fact that you can still trust your gut by being analytical about how you trust your gut. So I'll give you an example. I was pretty unhappy living in New York City. My job was good. It was fine, but I didn't like the lifestyle that I was living and my situation there. COVID hit. I ended up moving back with my parents, waiting it out. And I decided then and there that I wanted to move to a different city. And so going through that decision, it wasn't like it popped in my head and I said, F it, I'm going to go. It was like, okay, I want to make this decision. I have nothing but time. I'm literally sitting at home doing nothing. Let me analyze the shit out of this thing, right? Let me figure out every possible scenario. Can I find a roommate? Is rent more affordable? Will my job let me do it? Do I have friends there? Will I be happier? All these things kind of had to play into my decision. And so while the trigger of it was my gut telling me you are unhappy in New York, make yourself happier, I also do think that I needed to analyze that situation to be able to trust my gut to make these big decisions. And so Parker and I and Chase got into it a little bit because, some people are like, you can't do all that. You'll bog yourself down. You got to trust your heart and where you're headed. But I think for some people, they really do need to make themselves feel better to analyze the situation. I'm curious, like, what you think, Kyle, or how you work with that.
Well, there's certainly an element of control when you're analyzing, right?
Yeah.
You feel like you can rein in some of those external factors that you can't control. This is great. I was talking to a client about this the other day. We were trying to figure out, and talking to actually a couple other buddies here in Kalamazoo, this idea of process versus innovation, right? This idea of the known and the unknown, and wrestling with that. Now, in the context of an organization or business, there's usually more process-oriented people who want to analyze that they're type A, they're looking for that certainty. And on the other side, there's these innovators. So I'd like to imagine this as kind of a river. And on one coast, there's this big billboard that says process, and on the other coast, there's this thing that says, innovation or improvisation, right? Whatever word you want. But you can start to understand, the differences between those two. And you're on a rowboat in the middle of this river, and you start to drift one way or the other, and which one do you tend to gravitate towards? And I think there's culturally, for businesses, they wrestle with that all the time. And individually, for me, I lean more towards that innovation, experimentation, improvisation side. I'll stop there. That's taking your idea and running with it in a whole nother direction.
No, that's fine.
Go ahead.
I wanted to say one cool thing that I never thought about it before that you just said was, you said businesses think like this too. Mm-hmm. That never crossed my mind, but you're totally right. Parker and I are both in consulting still. We go to some of these clients, right? Big, famous companies.
Big names.
And you're like, you still do it that way? How? Like, you're an enormous company with a huge budget. How do you still use that system from the 80s or have that process that's still on paper or whatever it is? And I don't know why, I never thought of it like that, similar to a human, of like, trust your gut to change and innovate, or stick with the status quo in your comfort zone. But it does relate so much to businesses as well. That's exactly what they do. They stick in their comfort zone because the CEO doesn't want to be the one on the chopping block if making change goes bad. So let me just ride it out.
I don't know. I think it's, the paradox.
You're in that space, choice. Parker. Yeah, go ahead.
The paradox of choice, right? Yeah. That phenomenon. I think about, you go to a store and they have now, like, you walk into H&M or whatever, a billion things to choose from. And we think it from a business perspective. Consultants come in and they're like, you could do this, and this, and they all look great. Oh, wow, we can make a lot of decisions, and maybe a lot of these decisions would be good for the business. But it's that paradox. It's like, oh my God, there's so many decisions to make. I can't even make one. Yeah. You know what? Actually, I'm staying with where I am because we know how things work, and it's actually not as bad as we expected. You're almost like scared because there's so many decisions. And a young adult, bringing it back full circle, there's so many decisions that you can make as a young adult to elevate your life, whether it's, or just in general, is how to show up in your day, what to do before you go to work, after work, what you do during work, who you interact with, what money you're putting in your retirement savings and whatnot. Like, there's so many decisions going on. And as a young adult, we get hit hard right off the bat with those after college. And we're on our own. And it's like that paradox. It's so difficult to make a decision because sometimes it is comfortable to just be like, you know what, actually, when I reevaluate, it's fine. And think about what does not come about just that inability to make a decision.
Yeah, I'll go back to chapter 1. I remember graduating from school and kind of having that first job at that startup. And the first couple of weeks, I was being like, what's going on? Like, it was just really bizarre. I will never forget that. There's one moment in particular where I just remember being very confused, which is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I suppose hearing you talk about it, Parker, makes me feel like this is not uncommon for people to be like, what's going on? You go through school and it's very structured, and you've got your semesters and you've got the coursework, and you get through, and then you've kind of like, it's suddenly like open playing field, and you have to make your own curriculum and be responsible for effectively elevating yourself. So I can certainly sympathize with that dilemma. And I'm not sure, I really want to bring it back to the business thing, but I recognize this is not a consulting, sharpening our consulting skills conversation. We'll save that for another day.
Well, no. I mean, we did our research. You're Western Michigan's University 30 under 30 for what, small business owners? We got to hear from the business perspective. What does the entrepreneur think when it comes to
let's
this?
go back to that. Let's go back to the river analogy. I think there's on either side. I kind of talked about it from a business perspective. There's process and improv. And if you think about it as a slider on a personality scale, on the one side, which would be process from a business perspective, is a person being 100% like they've landed on this coast, they're OCD, right? Like everything has to be perfect for me to do anything. And then if they were to go back to the other coast, which is total improv, that's schizophrenia. That's just total absolute chaos and confusion and multiple personalities, and they can't even function. So when you get back in that rowboat and you row back to the middle of the river, whether we're talking about it as a business, trying to figure out if we should innovate or stay the course and be more process driven, or whether you're trying to figure out as an individual, where do I tend to lean? I think just understanding that awareness, back to that pillar that you talked about, I think just kind of understanding where you drift in that spectrum can be super helpful in figuring out what the next step is and how, as an individual, you can feel comfortable about what the next step is. Because there's people who are closer to that improv schizophrenia bank, that coast on this river, that would just be like, hey, we're going to go to California this weekend. I don't have any plans. We're going to go to the airport and get a ticket right now. We're just going to go. Like that's too much for me. And there's other people who would be like, wait, what? You went to Europe and you only booked your Airbnb and that was it? So that, there's just different levels of this. And I think for everyone trying to figure out how and what that next step is, whether it's whatever chapter you're transitioning from and to, I think that understanding where you're at on that spectrum as an individual, I think is just super impactful and powerful. I think that's a key piece to the recipe of understanding yourself.
I'm going to jump in right here before Sam jumps back in, but like I'm thinking so big on this right now because this has been something I've been thinking about. I often think, from a business standpoint, I put like my, I feel like a consultant here, but also outside of the consulting, just in the nature of like living life. I think a lot of times we're either on the far left side or the far right side, not politically. We could be falling towards that fully innovative improv side, or we're fully on that 100% process driven. This is how I go. But we're scared that there's something in between that would actually it would work really well for us. And we forget about that. There could be a nice balance that actually could be a lot easier to get to, but we think so broad. We think it's either A or B.
There could be some islands in the middle of that river.
Certainly.
You just got to row and try to find them.
Exactly.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's great. And recognizing, it's not black and white. It's not binary. You don't have to pick one and go straight towards it. Yeah.
We think so binary all the
Great
time.
Thoughts.
Yeah.
Damn. Kyle, I knew this was going to be great when we just get deep right away. It's fantastic. Yeah, I want to make sure that we have some time for some of our other segments that we like to do with guests.
Yeah.
One of them being our rapid fire section, right? Yes. And so we haven't prepped you for any of these questions, but we like to ask some questions, get the first thing top of your mind. So I'm going to start us off with this. This is a little bit more fun than our introspective deep river analogy, although I love that. And I think someone should make that into a t-shirt because I think that's sick. But my first question, Parker and I love this concept of your board of inspirers, right? You mentioned you were on a lot of boards for philanthropy. And what a board is it's a collection of people who are there for the greater good. And so we've taken that concept that you are on, right? And we've turned that into your personal board of inspirers, as we call it. People who are either in your life that mentor you or people that inspire you to be better that you might not know. So who are a couple people that are on your board of inspirers, Kyle?
Board of inspirers. This is like a hypothetical board. I could just whip these guys up.
Yeah, and so like mine has people who I've never met, and then also some mentors that we talk to monthly. It's kind of the combo of both. Okay, yeah, this is fun. I think I would put my dad on that list. I think Jamara Bogan's on that list. I think for folks that I know, I think I'd put Jocko Willink is such an interesting character. You guys are probably familiar with the Navy SEAL guy. I think I'd put him on there. Probably if someone's come this far in the podcast, they're probably like, this guy knows Jocko Willink, because I'm
maybe seem like a different brand of person, but he would be interesting because he's just so intense, and he strikes me. I mean, discipline equals freedom. I think that he to me is a little bit closer to that process side of the bank, right? And I think I need a little bit out of my life, so it'd be fun to have him around. Another guy that's really interesting that I think would be fun to chat with would be Blair Enns. He's got a podcast and a couple books that he's written that have really helped me start my own digital consultancy. I think Toto Wolff, F1, the principal of Mercedes.
Love Toto Wolff,
dude.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, here we are. Yeah. So I think he would be another guy. Toto Wolff is interesting. I'm going to take your question and put a twist on it. If someone was to call me on the phone and say, "Hey, Kyle, we want you to come work for us right away. Can you come up?" And Toto called me, I'd be in, and I'd get there and he'd be like, "Dude, you don't know anything about cars. You're a janitor." I'd be like, "Sweet, man." And I just start doing it. I mean, that guy just strikes me as he's an interesting
successful
character.
He turns people and things around him into success. Some people just have that gift, man. And I think you're exactly right. If you surround yourself with people with that gift, they just have it. Like some people are just winners. They win.
Right.
Some people are just successful. They find a way to be successful. And if you can be with them, like, do it.
So I took some non-athletes, and now we're starting to maybe move into the sports world. So Toto Wolff's one. I think Nick Saban's another one. I think if Nick Saban called me and said, "Hey, I need you to hold a clipboard," I think I would be interested in doing that for a football season, because it would just be so fascinating to be around that dude. And I mean, his whole thing's the process, right? That'll come back here, I'm sure, when we get to a couple other questions. But I think that would be the board. I think that's a nice, well-rounded group of folks.
That's a nice looking board. You got a wealthy board.
There's a lot of rich people, but not a lot of diversity there. I think diversity wise, I'm trying to think what would be a good female. You know what? I really like, the assistant city manager now, actually, at City Kalamazoo, Rebecca Kick. I frequently find myself meeting with her and talking through things about our city. I think she'd be really interesting to have on the board. I think she'd be my big pick there. I'm trying to think.
Quite the board.
I mean, it's getting bigger. What does that mean?
That's okay. And
this is good. This is making me realize that I need more diverse sources of inspiration. That's what I've learned here.
It's fair enough. And it's just such a cool exercise because everyone has different answers on who they look up to, or, sometimes we say that and they only pick people that they know. And it's like, you can kind of tell a lot from a person if it's like, I need someone coaching physically with me that I know, or the people who are a little bit more vision based than accountability based, who are like all hypothetical people that they haven't met yet. So I think psychology wise, we can tell a lot about a person by their board of inspirers. So
what did I reveal about myself?
You're a nice balance. You got an island right in the middle on both sides. You're good.
Good. All right.
I got a deep one here. Okay.
Ooh, all right.
You ready? You said you like to mentor and teach, right? And help others. If you were writing a letter to a young entrepreneur, 10 years old, that they would read when they graduated college, a young person with, what are maybe like 5 quick pieces of advice you would give to that person who would open that envelope and learn from Kyle about what it means to be an entrepreneur?
It means to be an entrepreneur. Well, let's see. So when are they reading the letter? They're currently 10. They will be 18 when they read it, approximately. You
look at them, you know them well.
Okay.
But you know that down the road they'll pick up this letter.
Okay. I'm not sure if I can come with,
but I like the question.
I was just about to say, man, this requires some thought here. I will say, first thing that comes to mind that I think I had a hard time switching from was the school of thought of that failure is a bad thing. I mean, I'm sure you guys could we've kind of danced around this topic a little bit where school is so structured, get good grades, and you get out and it's like, wait, you mean I can like take a swing at this presentation and it might totally bomb and that's okay? Well, yeah, kid, that's sales. Like, oh, okay. Like, so it's like, wait, what? I think that's probably a big lesson that I would try to impart, is that the failure isn't the end. Maybe, I don't know if that's a good line for it, but something like along that line of school has taught you to think, A, B, C, D, E, F, not good. I think you get into the real world, and if you can figure out how to utilize your failures, this is so stupid because now I sound like a Silicon Valley bro, but I think that's a very, fail fast, fail forward. I think that's a big, I'm saying it. I'm already saying it. So I'm bought in on that philosophy, but I think that's a big piece and that's why Silicon Valley has that big lesson, is that it's so academic to be like, you have to nail this the first time and you only get one shot. And sometimes you do have to do that in business, but I think there's a lot of opportunities. If you find a way to minimize the downside risk, maximize your upside, failure suddenly is not so scary of a proposition. That's only one thing. Shoot,
I feel like leaving it on. Yeah, Parker said 5. 5 come off the dome is tough.
That could be a whole
talk for like 2 minutes. That's a whole letter.
That could be a whole podcast.
That was beautiful, and I think cool question, Parker. We didn't prep that one, but I think that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And thinking back, you mentioned at the beginning you love teaching and coaching, so I think that was a perfectly aligned question. Yeah. I'll end our rapid fire with this one that should be a little bit faster for you, Kyle. Parker and I love to read. Core to who we are. So I want to ask you, what is a book you want to recommend to us in Elevation Nation that we should read?
I want to find something that's general enough for the audience. The book that immediately comes to mind has been very recent, but is more specific to consulting and running a small business. That's Win Without Pitching. That's by Blair Enns. That's a good one. I don't know if you guys have heard that one yet on the podcast.
No. Let me add it to my Goodreads. I think
super specific. If an athlete picked that up, they wouldn't. An entrepreneur, I think, would get some interesting value out of it. But maybe if an athlete wouldn't. I'm trying to think if there's like an interesting, more like mindset book. Dude, I've just got stacks of books next to me here, so I'm just looking at like titles I've read recently. Yeah, dude, I'm thinking I'm gonna have to lean that way. Win Without Pitching.
I like it.
No,
I just added it to my list. This is perfect.
Sam adds it to his list.
We are entrepreneurs.
I just buy it.
Well, I read on the Kindle.
Okay. Here's what I'll say. I got another one for you. This is a good one. This is maybe more general and more into the elevation mindset. The Extended Mind by Annie Murphy Paul. That was a really good book, and it talks about all these things about effectively how you learn outside your brain. So you learn through touch, you learn through experience, you learn through
I like that.
All these.
What is it called?
The Extended Mind.
I really enjoyed reading this. So let's see here. I'll just read maybe like the index here to just give a quick little taste here. So how we think with our bodies through sensations, movements, and gestures. How we think, or how surroundings impact how we think, whether they're natural spaces, built spaces, and how our relationships impact how we think, and how we use them to think with other experts, peers, and groups. Boom. There you go. The Extended Mind.
Added. I love it. I love books like that. I think they're so
literally already. It's on the way. It's on the way. My girlfriend gets like, it's these books. I buy a book every time we have a podcast, I feel like. And
yes.
My bookshelf is filling up. She's like, when are you reading all these? I'm like, see?
In time.
I have my whole life to read them. Exactly. They're there. And if I want to go through it, I will. I usually read multiple books at a time, which is my serial killer trait. But
I actually do that too. I'll have like a batch of books that just come in, and Ariel, she'll just be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like,
"We need more bookmarks."
This is just it. I need more bookshelves. So I'm building the library, right? What is it? It's that old quote. I don't even remember who said it. Some '80s sales guy, right? You can judge a person by either the size of their TV or the size of their library. Which one are you? Right? Like one of those things. So that's not as applicable today because there's screens everywhere. But I think in 1980 when he said that, the big screen TV was a big investment, and a library was one too. So how, which one are you going to pick?
And now I read on the Kindle, and Parker makes fun of me every day. So it is what it is. Kyle,
you like the Kindle?
I love the Kindle. I mean, it's so easy. I take it with me. Travel a lot. Small, compact. Don't like a book. On to the next one.
Yeah.
And no, I like not sponsored by Kindle.
And then I can give it to someone else.
Me too. I get it.
Like
I
people, get it. I've lended out like 4 books this month to people who have like come over. They're like, "Oh, can I read that?" I'm like, "Yeah, just bring it back."
So this is great. So I used to, my philosophy, I did this in school. I would never write in a textbook because I wanted to get the highest resale value possible, right? I also knew I was only going to keep it for the semester. And as soon as I got out, one of my other mentors told me, he's like, "Well, what's the point in having a book if you can't effectively have a conversation with the author as you're reading?" And I was just like, "Oh my God." So now all I do is I just scribble through books, and it's just like, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, or like this reminds me of this other thing. And I've actually started to do, this is a habit I got out of. At the start of the pandemic, I did what's called the slip box method, which is you take a note, you mark it up, then you go back to your book and you take index cards. And for every note that you made or thing you underline, you make an index card note of it, source it. And then you have to take a second card and you have to add on to that and say, well, why was that important, or why did that interest me, or what's the way to elevate that? So then you take your one note and you suddenly have two, and then you organize all these note cards. Anyway, there's another quick little fun game. I have gotten out of that practice, and I recently was like, shoot, I need to get back into this, because I got a book from the library as opposed to buying it, and I had to take all my notes on note cards as opposed to scribbling in the book first and then doing that.
Yeah. I like it. It's a life hack. It's a book hack. I can still do that in the Kindle. It's just harder to type. But
so then what I've got these recipe boxes just full of note cards. There's probably a book worth of material in there now, just like, because I've all these things I've read, I've now distilled and reorganized. It's just like these weird decks of cards with thoughts.
That is your start of when you're going to write a book.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Those in your journals. Journals. So that's what's cool about annotating, collecting stories from your life. Us doing this damn podcast, you having your podcast, it's like...
That's right.
I don't know exactly my vision of what my life will look like in 30 years, but I do know that I will hopefully have had some amazing memories, met some really cool people. This podcast is helping, and can turn that into a teaching and learning moment. And so that's what's so beautiful about all this, and why I'm so grateful that Jamari and Zach connected us to you, Kyle, and why we're really excited. You passed your hazing process. You are absolutely in the nation now. This is the start of what Parker and I are trying to create with Elevation Nation, and connecting people, and being able to not just talk to you once when we're on the podcast, but hopefully us connecting multiple times throughout the year, and checking in with each other. So I'm going to trust that you and Parker and myself, we can hold all of us accountable to do that. I do, however, want to end with our favorite segment here, Kyle.
Yes. Which
is our mental motto. Right? We started doing this segment and asking people, what is a phrase, what is a motto that they live by here? And so I want to pass it off to you as the newest member of Elevation Nation to share with all of us your mental motto.
I think the big one is roots, not fruits. So this idea that, and I like that for three reasons. Number one, if you focus on the roots of your plant, metaphorically, or of your life, you're focusing on the foundation, right? You're focusing on principles and the foundation of what you can effectively grow. I think the second thing is, the reason why I like that mental motto is it's a reminder that it takes time, and it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, when you think about a plant putting roots down, or you think about that expression putting roots down, time is naturally implied in that model. And I think the third thing is acknowledging that all the progress that you make will not be readily visible. So when, again, the plant analogy, of course, all the roots are grown underground. And I think all three of us recognize that mental fortitude that you're trying to build, even though you're building it every day and you're aware of it, you're not necessarily going to see the results. And when you focus on the roots rather than trying to get those fruits, I think that's when you start to figure I think that unlocks something. And that's really a meaningful phrase to me. I think it's very similar to, we mentioned Nick Saban earlier, very similar to the idea of the process. Right, you just focus on the process. It's very similar to, what's that book called by, is it Bill Walsh? The score will take care of itself, that type of thing. You start to focus on the things that are behind the scenes, foundational, things that take time, and you'll see those dividends and those fruits, year after year.
Woo! I love that one. I was like, Sam and I, we have this whole system in the back. We text back and forth while we're going through, asking questions. We're just like, fuck yeah, Kyle. That was awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
And first of all, I mean, fruits get picked off or they die if no one eats them.
That's another good point. I mean, there's a bunch of ways you could take it. Yeah.
I'm going to have to sit back and really think about this one and look at the stars and really, damn, there's so many ways we could take this. But Kyle, I mean, this has been such a pleasure to meet you and have an awesome conversation and learn about all the amazing things that you're doing. But more so, I want to thank you for sharing your story. It's inspiring. One piece of why we started Elevation Nation was obviously to help ourselves, but to help others, people who may not know that path or know where they want to go. And sometimes it's hard to find those individuals who could become your board of inspirers. It's hard to find those people who have been through places that maybe you want to get to one day. And, I think listening to your story, all I got to say is you're an incredible guy. And, what's amazing about it is you're doing amazing things at a young age, but you'll continue to elevate and elevate. And when we're getting back together, maybe it's 6 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 25 years from now, you're going to be like on a really, really high building. I mean, this elevator is going to be pretty big.
I hope so.
I can't thank you enough, my man.
Hey, thank you. I'm humbled to be on the show. You guys have had an incredible roster of guests, and I'm fortunate to be on that list. So thank you very much for having me.
Elevation Nation. Until next week, peace. Kyle.